So why do we just show up? So culture is a big reason. The trauma that's in all of us from the past, every war, every hatred, every bigotry, every anti-Semitic, everything. So that is in us. I don't know that as a collective, we have done the healing to overcome that. And we don't know the truth about showing up. That's a big reason. The truth about showing up is that we're in 3 roles at all times. And at a level here,
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for today's show. Our guest today is international speaker Marcy Axelrod. Hello, Marcy, and welcome to the podcast.
Mel, what an honor to be here. And I really want your guests to hear, thank you for your contribution, sharing about your family's history in Texas. And it's so important for the world to know.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So when you were 6 years old, you had a stuttering problem. Did you ever envision yourself overcoming that and becoming a 2-time TEDx speaker?
Did I ever? So the answer is absolutely yes. I did. Not when I was 6. I mean, not when I was in the middle of it. And, TED at the time in the 70s, I'm dating myself here, didn't exist. Thank you, Chris Anderson, for creating the whole TED reality. But as I grew older, because of the stutter, and this is important for people to understand, I mean, we are the result of the traumas that we go through. So because of the stutter, success to me was people sitting on the edge of their seats, learning and getting value from someone else's words, someone else's thoughts. So that is the linkage between the 2 TED Talks and all the keynote speeches I give today and the stuttering.
So what did you learn during those days when you were struggling to make your own voice heard?
So the main thing, and I'd be happy to tell people the story, but the main thing that I learned is, number 1, most people throw their show up choices away. Number 2, they don't realize how much everything we do matters. We matter, and how we show up matters. The third thing, and believe me, people who've worked in the White House have told me this, Marcy, it was such a realization. We have a choice in how we show up.
Okay, we're going to be talking a lot about that in this episode. Your book is there. We'll be discussing that. But before we get to your writing and your speaking, again, going back to your speaking, I found out from doing some research that you're also an artist. So when did you begin doing wall sculptures?
Wow. When did I begin doing wall sculptures? Probably when I was about 6. And I'll tell you, there's this exciting thing. I'm probably going to be in the Hamptons Fine Art Fair this summer. And I'm about to participate in the gala for the Bruce Museum. I mean, these are real pinnacles. If you want, I can show you. Do you want to see some of the sculpture?
Sure. Let's see it.
I just did a big installation this weekend, you should know.
Okay.
Yeah, so sculpture shows up, right? And everything we do shows up. And, showing up is a way of living that reconnects us with ourselves, our situation, and society. And these are show up. This is a show up sculpture. Can you see it?
I can see it. Yes, that's beautiful. I love the colors.
And it's on a turntable and it moves, but let me give you some of the other ones. Yeah, I have a gallery in my house. That's what, here you go. I don't know if you can really see it.
I can see it well.
That, and that's my gallery. This is not on a backing yet.
I love the colors. Everybody who's listening, you're going to have to go to YouTube to watch the video so you can see all these vibrant colors.
Yeah, exactly. I have these are the ones that are not in another gallery right now. This one was just accepted into a global art exhibition. Yeah, anyway, this is wall sculpture.
Wow.
You're getting it real time.
Really nice. That's really nice.
Very 3 dimensions. You see, it's very 3-dimensional.
Wow. Yes, that's nice. Good job.
Thanks for asking. But I mean, everyone has art in them, and the art can literally be how you stand, and show a depth of listening and care before someone. Even in the back of a room, if you're the person who stands there silently in the back of the room, you show up authentically in your power with your care. Believe me, you emanate a power and people will feel it and they will turn and they will ask you about yourself and opportunities will show up for you. And I'd be happy to explain how all of this happens, but I'm going to let you get back to if you had certain things in mind and you wanted to guide me.
Yeah, my next question is about how you got to this point in speaking. So, what did you learn from 20 plus years as a strategy management consultant in Silicon Valley?
Yeah. So my success with KPMG Consulting, one of the leaders of the high tech strategy practice in Silicon Valley, which was definitely the epicenter of high tech strategy and probably still is. I was in front of executives for companies that have, 120,000 people around the world, HP and Cisco and Storage Tech, Symantec, Yahoo. I learned that my success, I mean, yes, it rested on global studies, a world-class team, tons of real data. But in addition to that, the permission that I earned as a young woman to give advice to executives was from how I chose to show up. And the way I showed up was through thinking about the relationship among things. How is this executive relating within him or herself? How are they relating to the situation that's showing up? A board meeting, a crucial communication with their staff or with Wall Street. So there's a self-grounding, there's a situational readiness, and then there's a societal connectedness. Those are the three roles in which we show up. And my success was all about that. I hadn't written the book yet. And I hadn't done global studies specifically asking people about showing up, but that truth was there for me largely just because I started to devour neuroscience and psychology at age 12.
All right. So, what's the difference between being solo and being alone?
Ooh, well, as many people know, Vivek Murthy, our 19th and 21st Surgeon General of America, talked about the loneliness epidemic. So, and it kills people more than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. I mean, this is big time stuff. The difference, very crucially so, when you feel like a self that's defined as I, me, mine, you got your mirror like this facing you, you are alone. You are separate from. And then what happens? You compete. The world isn't showing up with, to, and for you. It's kind of you against the world. And a lot of people feel that way because that's what society teaches us. Solo is powerfully grounded in yourself. And what does that mean? That's a definition of self that Eastern contemplatives have always known. That's the root of every religion that indigenous people live. That solo is like the tree that's right outside my window, Mel. That tree, it might look like it's a tree by itself, but underneath that ground, its roots are like this. It's getting nutrients that it needs from the tree over there. It's breathing the air. It's taking in that CO2. It's absorbing the sunlight. It's very much within a situation that's very rich. Solo recognizes we are always within not just ourself, but our situation and our society. This is how we show up. Like it's irrefutable. Like everything is in these three roles. It's an individual self within a situation. It's a member of something beyond itself that I call society. You can call it a religion, a family, a community, a company, a sports team, a Mets fan, like whatever. Everything shows up in these three roles. That's the difference. Solo is powerful and flows through in a way that the world shows up for you the way that you want it to. Alone is separate. It's probably also at some point sad, anxious, depressed, disengaged at a certain or less engaged, less vibrant, less creative.
All right. So, let's follow up to that question.
Yep.
Does the American concept of rugged individuality hamper us from becoming who we should be as a part of a functioning community?
Thank you. Fabulous question. Yes, rugged individuality. So there's actually a term in the show up lexicon called individual. An individual inside me. All the skills and knowledge and everything that I need is inside of me. Really? Who are you kidding? Really? You came into the world unto yourself. You didn't come through anybody. You didn't receive, a parent's love. You haven't been nourished by the earth. It's individual. It's all about you kind of winding up inside yourself, kind of like the clusters in the left hemisphere of the brain that we can talk about that like are like self-reflective. Stop staring at your own mirror. So individual is a term that's in the book, How We Choose to Show Up. And it's just more accurate because we belong and we become everything through community, through a family, through reflecting. You're a writer. You're a gifted writer, Mel. What does that
Thank you.
mean? You are welcome. What that means is that you have taken time to reflect. Writing is this incredible gift. Writing says, I'm going to think and reflect and clarify a thought such that when I call upon words, when I call upon the language that others can read, there is something of value that's going to go into the ethers, into the other person, into society. And then it will indwell within them. I am changing them with the written word. We are all individuals, far more than individuals. So the answer to your question is a yes. The rugged individualist thing is, I think, harmful.
Okay. All right. So the rest of this episode, we're going to be talking about showing up, and your book is about that, and your TED talks are about that. So let's start off with, what does it mean to truly show up?
Okay, I'll answer that, but it's so funny because this whole thing's been about showing up. Because
Right.
even if you don't use the word, everything is showing up. Like, why are we doing a podcast? Because society has told us that this is a good way to get ideas out there. Society is showing up, the podcast is showing up, the tech is showing up, everything is showing up. And by the way, it's showing up as its individual self within a situation, right? Which is the contact point with reality and within the broader society. Okay, so you asked, what is truly showing up? Truly showing up is when you understand these concepts and you make a choice to fully inhabit your three roles. Your individual self, you are truly deeply present in this moment, your situation, and you recognize the impact throughout society that you're having right now. That is truly showing up.
So what does it mean to just show up?
Have you ever had a moment where you kind of look back and you thought, like, what just happened? Like, that was not how I wanted to be. I was like half there, half not, somewhat disengaged. My research, my 20 years of research show, Mel, and people like nod their head and laugh about this, but it's an awful statistic. 80% of us just show up 80% of the time. So, I mean, it's kind of improv life, right? Like you get out of bed, you turn the alarm off, and you just kind of get going. You're just like almost a version of sleepwalking. You're not quite noticing or tuning in or being with or enacting care around the things that you're doing. I'm going to show you something.
Okay.
The continuum, the show up continuum explains this. So, yeah, and then I'll tell you a really quick story. So you're going to have this in your show notes, but effectively when you go from level 1 barely there into level 2 just showing up. Level 1, you're just in yourself. You're just self-reflective. The world shows up the way you fully expect it to. There's nothing new. You're missing the truth of what's going on. As you move into just showing up, you're intermittently present. So you start to notice things. And then as you become more present and truly show up with the right hemisphere attention system online, which I can talk about, you start to tune in. And then you start to feel with, you're going from alone to solo here, but you're also situationally present and societally presence. So you start to notice, tune in, feel with, and enact care. That's when your right hemisphere attention system and your whole body's care system is online. And you're fully in your three roles: self, situation, member, society.
Okay, go ahead and share the stories. You said you were going to share a story after that. Go ahead
Yeah.
and
So right after my divorce, I was dating, date story. And there was this guy, we had a great first call, and we were meeting for the first time. And he kind of shows up and sees me and totally conducts me, like puts his arm around me and kind of controls me and sits me down. And I looked at him and I said, I was in the middle of writing the book. And I said, how did you prepare to meet me? You would think after this great connection on the phone and this high potential date, he would have, I don't know, maybe look me up. I just really basic stuff. And he looked at me. I was like, well, I checked the time, I checked my look, checked the weather. I just headed on out. That's just showing up. Either you're intentful and you care or you don't. That is just showing up. And he never saw me again.
Wow. That doesn't surprise me. We've only known each other for 20 minutes, and that doesn't surprise me.
No, I mean, it doesn't mean that life doesn't happen and you don't bump into people and you aren't prepared, but it's different. When you understand, look, everything and everyone, Mel, is showing up every moment. When you think about that and what that means, you have an impact on the world every moment because you're changing the world every moment. Let me briefly bring in statistics here that I always talk about. Nicholas Christakis, physician up at Yale, he did this incredible research that shows what we do goes 3 people deep through society. You, Mel, right now, you are 45% more likely to think, feel, and act the way that I do just by virtue of interacting with me. And then you go and interact with someone on your team, someone you work with, they are 25% more likely to think, feel, and act the way that I do. And then that person goes home to their spouse, their kids. That third level out is 10% more likely to do what I do just because you were with me. That's 8,000 people. Most of us have a bubble around us of more or less 20 people who we regularly interact with. So 20 times 20 times 20, 8,000 people are being impacted you every moment. And one of the things that I tell people to do, Mel, and I think this is really important, people have told me that it changes them. What I want people to do is to live this truth. After you listen to this podcast, whenever you're around someone next, I want you to look up and I want you to just observe them and notice something that they're doing or they're thinking or they're feeling is a result of me. And if you're in a parking lot and you're staring at a stranger, guess what? It's true for them too. Because by the time you get to your friend's colleague's daughter, you don't know that person. So there are strangers out there who you have impacted. And I want people to in turn just sit with that, something that they're doing. Then granted, 8 billion people on the planet. The person you see next may not be one of those people in your 8,000 person bubble. Fine. But it goes on forever. Everything you do, even if you're alone, I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee. And you're like, that doesn't impact. Really? Did I cast an economic vote to buy those coffee beans or that coffee machine or to use that water or to be more alert for the next meeting I attend? Everything we do, it's pulling through a 7-continent supply chain. Someone over there is driving a forklift to pick up pallets of stuff that include the next thing of coffee I bought, right? Right? Everything we do has an impact, even when we're sitting and meditating or journaling, something I tremendously recommend. But that's what I want you to do. And every day of your life, if you just observe for 5 seconds that person who you don't know, and you re-internalize, you relive, I matter, you will show up more as you want for who you want to be.
That's really fascinating. And one thing it made me think about from a different perspective is I notice body language. I really notice body language a lot. And so I find myself studying people and can get lost in it. And some people look at me and say, "Why are you staring at me?" When I'm actually not really staring at them. I'm looking at them and observing. But one thing I noticed, and this goes back 30,
Mhm.
my mom died when I was 25 years old. And it was like right after, like the week she died. I remember just walking through the mall, just trying to clear my head and looking at people laughing and families together, shopping and doing whatever they were doing, and thinking, none of these people know the suffering I'm going through right now. And then it made me think, I don't know what they're going through right now. It's my job
Mm.
to find out what they're going through, to treat people
Mm.
differently because you never know what they're experiencing at any particular moment.
Wow. First of all, that was such a life-defining situation for you, and you are still living, with your mother, with who she is and was and continues to be for you. I'm feeling your connection right now. But wow. So what was it like when you saw these people, and you were probably thinking, wow, they have their mother with them.
Yeah, and that's and I lost both my parents by the time I was 25 years old. My dad died when I was 13, and my mom died when I was 25. And so I think about those kind of things a lot. It's I've never been jealous about anybody's material success, what their wealth, any of that stuff, material
Mhm.
things. The only thing I've ever been jealous about with other people is if they still have their parents and the relationships they have with those parents.
Wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel that. And how does that translate for you into how you parent? Do you have kids?
I do. My kids are adults now, and I'm a grandparent now. Actually, just a couple days ago, my oldest daughter and her husband had their 10th anniversary, their wedding anniversary, and they renewed their vows. And she asked me to perform the ceremony for them, and that was really special. And it gave me a chance to think about my influence on her, and now her influence on her daughter, and how
Mm.
you talked about the interconnectedness. So the influence doesn't stop. My parents have been long gone, but their influence lives day to day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I very much feel that I live my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. I spent so little precious time with her, but oh my goodness, the seminal moments I remember for the first time feeling felt as a human being. I was in a taxi cab with her in New York. I grew up in Boston mostly. Taxi cab with her in New York. Saw her a handful of days a year. It was really a very distant interaction. And it must have been summer, and I was wearing shorts. I was like 8 or 10 years old, and she looked at me, and we were together right there. And she took her hand and kind of just did this on my thigh, just rub. That's it. And it was basically saying, "We're together. You're here with me." Honestly, I'm going to start to cry. I had never been touched like that. My family isn't a touchy family. It was cerebral. My parents are physicians. The discussion at dinner was about myocardial infarction, like heart attacks. And my mother would talk about patients who she saw. She's a pediatrician and global affairs, because my mother was thought it was very important. We must know what's going on in this world outside of Newton, Massachusetts. Um, and to be touched by my grandma, I will never forget it. And that lives in me so dramatically. And just as I'm sure your mother lives in you, probably will live, listen to these words, because it's epigenetic research. It goes from the grandparent to the grandchild. The genetics and the somehow it transfers 2 generations down. So your grandchildren will be living what you infuse in them from your parents.
Well, that's really important to me. I mentioned before we started the conversation on being recorded that genealogy is one of my passions. And so
Yeah.
being able to add that to my own knowledge and to learn more about that is something that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, there's a little bit about it in the book about, there were rat studies where some rats were shocked and the smell of lavender was what was around, and they were wondering if the offspring was also going to have a stress reaction of cortisol from the lavender, and it didn't. The offspring didn't. Instead, they found that there was more receptors for lavender, but not the stress response to it, which is interesting. So it's a heightened receptivity without the trauma.
Wow. That's interesting. That's really fascinating. So why do we just show up? Why do we do that?
Why do we just show up? Well, to bring up what you mentioned, society teaching us rugged individuality, society teaches us to compete. Society lies to us. You need some version of fame, you need some version of, money and a house and a car and to look a certain way. Garbage. It's completely untrue. What we need is to do what nature designed us to do, right? This is how nature designed humans to show up, which is to care and to support each other. There is no other reason. We are literally on the planet to take care of each other. What else could we be here for? To dominate, to have fast cars? I mean, to have a title that where someone looks at you, oh, wow, you must be a valuable person for me to talk to and thereby benefit from. No. So why do we just show up? So culture is a big reason. The trauma that's in all of us from the past, every war, every hatred, every bigotry, every anti-Semitic, everything. So that is in us. I don't know that as a collective, we have done the healing to overcome that. And we don't know the truth about showing up. That's a big reason. The truth about showing up is that we're in 3 roles at all times. And at a level here, let me show you. I made it very simple. I mean, I think inherently people know there's kind of levels of showing up. I just made it simple. 1, 2, 3, red to green. So I'm going to give you these slides, but level 1, barely there. We know what that is. Level 2 is just showing up. Level 3 is truly showing up. And there are 3 roles. You're an individualized self. You are a situation member, which is your contact point with reality. And you are a member of something beyond that, which I call society. And there's, so that's the truth of showing up. And you say, well, how do you do it well? Common sense. Be grounded in yourself. Be ready for your situations and be interconnected with society or the more that's out there. There's a chapter on each of those because those are big. What does it mean to be ready? So I want to bring up Fireman Rob.
Okay.
So Fireman Rob is an incredible person. I just met him. I was a guest on his podcast. He's a fireman and wanted to really bring attention on the 10th anniversary of September 11th to the historic and skilled response of the first responders. So he did an Ironman race and runs every marathon in full fire gear. Anyway, and he really truly shows up. He's written, a series of children's books. And anyway, what Fireman Rob said about readiness, because I said, how do you ready? How do you ready yourself? And he said, Marcy, the only way to ready yourself for a fire and for all the fires in your future is to run into a fire. And it was fascinating because you get different responses for people who do cognitive work or who do emotional work that's not life-threatening. Readying yourself can be planning and preparing and thinking it through and making the plans and the reservations and looking at the maps and a global rollout of SAP. Like there's a lot of things that you can plan, but then there's the lived experience. And what he was pointing to is the other readiness. There's 2 readiness, which is the embodied. How do I keep my body from going into full bore fight, flight, or freeze and not being able to respond in the fire? And he said, little fires, bigger fires, bigger fires. And he said that training now, and this is really, I think, telling for your listeners to hear, Mel. He said new firefighters used to do simulation, like they were trained in it in a way that's safe. They didn't get the visceral response. They weren't getting the training to run into a fire. So he said, now I've got this new guy at my hip who's never been in a fire. And he's running in there with me. And he's like, now I'm not just trying to save the life and save the home and whatever it is and put out the fire. I'm trying to save the life of the guy at my hip. It's like there is no way to ready yourself. You can envision, because I recommend a bunch of things. You envision, you deeply feel, you write, you enact. These things are great. They really, really are. But there's the rest of this truth, which is to a certain extent, showing up is real. It is tangible, right? It's a
Yes.
breath that enlivens us, and it can kill us. And it does kill us, right? So I wanted your listeners to understand, to a certain extent, you've got to live these things, and that is how you ready yourself. This is also just an example of, there's a lot to talk about with self grounding. What is that? I talk about trauma, and I talk about Bessel van der Kolk wrote the famous blue book, The Body Keeps the Score.
I
He's the
just
head
bought
of
that
the
book last week. I haven't read it yet, but I
Let's
just bought
talk
it.
about that. That's a life changing book. He's the head of Harvard's Trauma Center, for your listeners to understand. Yeah. Anyway, I talk in self grounding. I explain this because how we show up, this is showing up is an embodied real experience. It isn't, I'm going to walk into the meeting and try not to feel upset when imposter syndrome shows up for me and I can't be authentic, or when the boss doesn't seem to care, or when that other person steals the limelight. That is it's important to make the choice how you show up, but then you also have to envision, you have to go through the exercises such that you can dose yourself within a real situation, such that you have this ecology of practices that then enable you to show up as you choose in the moment.
I'm finding all this fascinating. I'm thinking about what you're saying and thinking through my mind, how does this apply to me? What can I do better? What do I need to learn? One of the things you talked about with the date you had, and I applied it to being a podcast host. When I invite someone on the show, it's almost like a date. I I find out I want to find out your story during this interview, but I've done the research ahead of time so that I know what questions to ask you to get to your story. And some of the questions that sometimes it brings out some stories that you may not have thought about in a while. But at some
Mhm.
point, you've expressed them somewhere online. I found a video, I found your resume on LinkedIn, or I found your book or something. And by just showing that interest in people, they are much more likely to tell their story with more depth.
Yes. So, what you just said, if I could summarize the beauty and truth in what you just said, Mel, when you show interest, when you show up with care, with your heart, people feel it. And you're saying you elicit a much truer, deeper story, their authentic self. And thank you for being you. And the
Thank
moment
you.
I saw that you were a writer, and I read some of what you wrote, and I felt that depth, I'm like, wow, what an honor. What an honor to be in the presence of this human being.
Hey, you're making me blush. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we're starting to wind down the conversation. I do have just a couple more questions for you. Questions that I'm
Mhm.
sure one question that you probably get a lot, and one that I'm guessing you've never gotten before. So we'll wind it down with those two. So you talked about how nature models for humans to show up.
Right.
How does your model help people connect more deeply with themselves and then others and their experiences?
Thank you for that. If it's all right, I'd like to comment on the question itself, and then I'll answer
Yes.
it.
Yes.
You said how nature models how we show up. Showing up explains that we are nature. So yes, what we historically, or what society has taught us to call nature, the stuff out there, the greenery, and yes, but we are also of the earth. We aren't just on the earth. Just like an apple tree, apples, the earth, peoples. I'm quoting Alan Watts there because it really struck me. And I think when you really look at the definition of God in almost every religion, very much this is actually consistent with it. So we are nature. The question is, how does it help us connect with ourself? What showing up explains is that the interconnection is always there. Society has taught us not to really understand what it is. Right now, as you look me in the eye, Mel, and I look at you in your eyes, you are literally changing the physiology of, I literally have a different feeling in my throat. I mean, as a stutterer, that's where a lot of my kind of reality and stress lives. But in my chest, you're changing how I'm breathing. You're changing how I'm standing. You're changing my tone, my gait, my timbre, my voice, my intonation. To think that we're not connected. Okay, even this is going on through a screen across half the country, assuming you're in Texas, right?
Yes, I am.
To think that we're not connected. So, what showing up does is it introduces us with this truth, with this reality in a very deep way. So that's how it reconnects us with ourselves and with each other. And I don't know that anyone's going to argue. I mean, I put words on it that I think are meaningful, right? We inhabit each other. How is it that with a millisecond glance, even to a photograph of someone you don't know, you feel what they feel? I mean, so showing up helps us to inhabit this truth more. And this is nature showing up in us, right? I'm going to quickly quote a study. This is, I believe it was done at Stanford and at Cornell, maybe at Harvard as well. I saw a number of papers that said the same thing. People were put in scanners, and they were told to just look at each other. And these are people who didn't know each other. They weren't looking at each other with, oh, I love you. It was just, okay, you're the other person in the scanner. And what their brains showed on the MRI in real time is that the brain waves started to do what's called resonate. So you literally had waves that were paralleling each other. And it's called, there's a big name here, interpersonal neural synchronization. So that's the neuroscience and the biology of how, when you see someone and you actually tune in, you are changed. This is part of how showing up, and I bring the science in and I explain it, and I give many examples. There's another one with Dr. Keltner, the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, who shows a 1-second tap to a forearm of someone who you can't see. There's a velvet curtain between you, a 1-second tap, and you will know with 68% accuracy what that person is feeling. And this isn't just basic stuff, happy, sad, mad, glad. It was things like longing and anticipation. I mean, things that are kind of not your typical, that person's bored. No. I think the likelihood of guessing accurately in that study was something like 8%. And people got it above 60% accurately. So anyway, these are some of the ways that showing up kind of really, it's like, really, people, this is nature. Okay. Like, this is going on in you right now. Let's just live it, because that's what.
All right. So as a final question here to wind down our conversation, I guarantee you've never been asked this question before. And you can, if you have, let me know, and then I'll be surprised. But if you were president of the United States today, what would you do that would change the dynamic of the country
Oh my God. I would do what I've been told. Oh my God, why isn't this going on now? I would teach the truth about showing up in kindergarten. Bam.
You want to expound on that? You don't have to.
I think the whole podcast expands upon that. In fact, there are quotes in the book with educators saying, oh my God, why isn't this taught in preschool? The truth about showing up. Because instead of, let's be kind, both of you can't use the tractor at the same time, you don't have to explain it that way. It's, Johnny over here feels how you're showing up. And the way that you show up is impacting me as your teacher here. And you care about Johnny and don't want to upset him. And he cares about you and doesn't want to upset you. So what are you thinking about how you can show up, given that the tractor is showing up is like the toy that both of you want to play with? How can we interact with this truth that there's more than just you going on here? There's a classroom and there's an educator and there's one toy. And then maybe little Juana, who's grabbing the tractor too, says, where's a piece of paper? I want to draw a tractor and I want to show Johnny that we can do other things together with tractors. Are you with me? Did you hear the creativity there? Did you get like on and on and on? I brought in the classroom. I brought in the fact that the toy doesn't need to be an object of control. We didn't even talk about that. Showing up, it loosens the control that everyone wants, because right now we are taught to have control over. I need to control that person. I need to get them to stop thinking about me a certain way so that I can be authentic. Because right now they're controlling me because they're just making me feel like I'm not wanted here or whatever, right? It's a very left hemispheric world, which is, it's okay. Can I spend 2 minutes on the hemispheres and how they impact? Yes. Okay. This is a big deal. If you're listening, I really want your listeners to focus on this. So the way that we evolved, we needed to do two things to survive, right? We had to be able to go like find that deer in the woods back in when we lived, outside, and focus on it and like narrow in. Nothing else is going on. Narrow in it, kill it, grab it, get it, so that we could feed ourselves. But we also had to do this other thing. Like while we were getting stuff to feed ourselves, we also had to not be fed to something else. All of a sudden, whoa, broad, spacious attention of the bigger picture. What else is going on? What are the little infants doing who are by my side over here? What is that predator bird doing that's swirling above me? What is that thing in the brush over there? My God, is that a tiger, right? Notice the two types of attention. But when you focus in, it's about power over. It's about apprehending, not comprehending. This is a quote from Ian McGilchrist, a psychiatrist from the UK, who wrote these tomes about the hemispheres of the brain called The Matter with Things and some others. In essence, the left hemisphere just shows up. It breaks everything into little bits. It focuses on that. It excludes everything else. Life loses its meaning. And we disengage largely because, my God, like 90% of what we do each day is kind of what we've done before. And the conversations we have are very similar to the ones that we just had, right? Absolutely. So what shows up for us is an expectation. We don't see reality. When you're in your right hemisphere, what else is going on? This is when you show up with care. Mel, you did it. And when you, wait, I'm going to switch hemispheres. Ready? When you brought up how connected you felt with your parents before they died, connecting within yourself and with the situation at the mall, connecting with me, that question, the care and the depth in that question that leads people to draw out and show and explain more of their story. That is a right hemisphere way of living. That is truly showing up. It's about comprehending. It's about being with. And by the way, it's the only attention system that enables you to really feel the music and you start to sway instead of it being crap in the background. It's like, I love that song. And all of a sudden some jive and hip shows up and you're bonding with people like, wow, I love this, right? This is when you feel like, can I give you a hug? Is that okay? You with me? That's how people want to truly show up. And by the way, when you do that, people feel you. Like, this is a great way to close out. People remember you. This is when you get that call of, my team is trying to do a project with this or that, and we need an expert. And you came to mind and you get the invitation and the doors are open for you. And this is when life feels rich and full and meaningful. That is called truly showing up. And it's being able to switch when you want to into your right hemisphere, your system of care, so that you see the rest of what's going on and it feels meaningful.
It is meaningful. And that's the perfect way to end this episode. So thank you a lot, Marcy. Speaker, artist, and writer Marcy Axelrod has been our guest today. Thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here.
Well, Mel, thank you so, so much. The book's on Amazon, and you can find me at choosetoshow.up.com.
Okay. And just to point you in a different direction here, my new website is www.podcastreallife.com. If you go there, you'll find all the links in the show notes of
That's
the
great.
charts that Marcy talked about will be there. Again, that's www.podcastreallife.com. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.